February 19th, 1945, 0902 hours. The black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima's southeastern beaches. Private First Class Eugene Sledge pressed himself into the ash, his M1 Garand cradled across his chest as mortar rounds detonated across the landing zone. Around him, Marines from the 5th Division clawed forward, each man carrying 8 pounds of semi-automatic firepower that would fire more rounds in the next 36 days than any rifle in any battle in human history. 5.5 million rounds. That number would be documented by ordnance officers counting empty clips and requisitioning ammunition from ships offshore. 5.5 million 30-06 cartridges fired from M1 Garand rifles across 8 square miles of volcanic rock and fortified tunnel systems. The Japanese soldiers defending Iwo Jima would come to fear this weapon above all others, not because of its power, but because of its relentless, unyielding rate of fire that never stopped, never paused, never gave them a moment's respite. This wasn't just another Pacific battle. Iwo Jima would become the crucible where the M1 Garand proved its worth against the most determined defensive system ever constructed. The Japanese garrison, 21,000 men under Lieutenant General Kuribayashi, had spent 8 months preparing positions that should have been impregnable. What they hadn't prepared for was the sustained firepower that American Marines could deliver with rifles that fired as fast as triggers could be pulled. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The M1 Garand had been America's standard infantry rifle since January 9, 1936, when it was officially adopted as the U.S. rifle, caliber 30, M1. By the time Marines landed on Iwo Jima, over 4 million had been manufactured, equipping virtually every American rifleman in the PERD, Pacific and European theaters. But Iwo Jima would be different. This would be the battle where the rifle's capabilities were pushed to absolute limits. The volcanic island measured just 4.5 miles long and 2.5 miles wide at its broadest point. Every yard was defended. General Kuribayashi had forbidden the traditional banzai charges that had failed so catastrophically elsewhere. Instead, he ordered his men to fight from fortified positions, to make the Americans pay for every foot of ground. His orders were explicit. Kill 10 Americans before dying yourselves. The Japanese defensive system on Iwo Jima represented everything learned from 3 years of losing battles. No more beach defenses that naval gunfire could destroy. No more suicidal charges into American firepower. Instead, Kuribayashi's men dug 11 miles of tunnels connecting 1,500 underground positions. Pillboxes with interlocking fields of fire. Blockhouses with walls 5 feet thick. Spider holes camouflaged in the volcanic rock. Cave entrances hidden by brush and volcanic vents. American intelligence estimates before the invasion suggested the island could be secured in 5 days. The reality would be 36 days of continuous combat, the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history, measured by casualty rates. Of the 70,000 Marines who landed, 26,000 would become casualties. Nearly 7,000 would die. Every casualty would occur within sight of the beach. The Japanese knew Americans were coming. Reconnaissance flights had photographed every square yard of the island. Naval bombardment on February 16th, 17, and 18 had pulverized surface structures. What the Americans didn't know was that 95% of Japanese positions were underground, protected by volcanic rock and reinforced concrete that naval shells couldn't penetrate. Private Sledge, whose memoir, With the Old Breed, would later document the horror of Pacific combat, was among the assault waves hitting the beaches at Hour. His unit, K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, carried M1 Garands that had been thoroughly cleaned and oiled aboard ship. Each rifle had been test-fired to ensure reliability. Each man carried 80 rounds in 10 8-round clips, plus additional bandoliers. The black volcanic sand made movement difficult. Marines sank to their ankles with each step. The beaches rose steeply toward the first terrace, a 15-foot embankment of loose volcanic ash that provided no cover. Behind that terrace, Mount Suribachi dominated the southern end of the island, 546 feet of volcanic rock, honeycombed with Japanese positions. For the first hour, the landing proceeded almost unopposed. Marines pushed inland, confused by the lack of resistance. Some began to think the naval bombardment had been more effective than anyone expected. Then, at 0930 hours, General Kuribayashi gave the order to open fire. Every Japanese gun on the southern end of the island fired simultaneously. Mortars, artillery, machine guns, and rifles opened up from positions the Americans couldn't see. The beaches became a killing ground. Marines dove for cover that didn't exist. Ammunition crates exploded, landing craft burned. The wounded struggled in the surf, and the M1 Garands began to fire back. The sound was distinctive. A sharp crack followed immediately by another, then another. Not the slow, deliberate fire of bolt-action rifles, but rapid semi-automatic fire. Marines identified targets, Japanese positions revealed by muzzle flashes, and poured fire into them. 8 rounds as fast as they could pull the trigger. Then the distinctive metallic ping as the empty clip ejected, a new clip slammed home, and another 8 rounds downrange. Corporal Tony Stein of a company, 1st Battalion 28th Marines, had modified a machine gun from a downed aircraft into a handheld weapon he called the Stinger. But most Marines relied on their M1 Garands, and in the chaos of the beach landing, the rifle's rate of fire became crucial. Japanese machine gunners would fire bursts, then duck back into their caves. Marines would see the muzzle flash and immediately put multiple rounds into the cave entrance. The Japanese had faced M1 Garands before. At Guadalcanal in 1942, at Tarawa in 1943, at Saipan and Tinian in 1944. But Iwo Jima was different. Here, the ranges were shorter, the fighting more intense, the targets more elusive. Japanese soldiers didn't expose themselves for more than seconds. Every engagement became a race between Japanese soldiers ducking back into cover and Marines getting enough rounds downrange to hit them. The M1 Garand excelled in this environment. A Marine would spot a Japanese soldier, raise his rifle, and fire 3 to 5 rounds in the time it would have taken to fire once with a bolt-action rifle. The cumulative effect across thousands of Marines created a wall of lead that suppressed Japanese positions, even when individual Marines couldn't see specific targets. By nightfall on D-Day, 30,000 Marines had landed. They held a beachhead barely 700 yards deep at its furthest point. Casualties exceeded 2,500. The beaches remained under Japanese artillery fire. Supplies piled up in confusion. And every Marine who survived that first day cleaned his M1 Garand, checked his ammunition, and prepared for the next day's fight. The rifle's reliability under Iwo Jima's conditions would prove critical. The volcanic ash was finer than talcum powder, infiltrating everything. It got into rifle actions, into ammunition clips, into men's lungs. Marines learned to keep their Garands wrapped in cloth until needed. They learned to wipe down the action multiple times per day. They learned that the rifle's gas system, while complex, was remarkably tolerant of dirt and ash. Japanese soldiers defending Iwo Jima carried Arisaka Type 38 or Type 99 rifles, both bolt-action designs similar to the German Kar 98K. The Type 38 fired a 6.5mm cartridge, the Type 99 a more powerful 7.7mm round. Both were accurate and reliable. Both required manual cycling of the bolt between shots, and both put Japanese soldiers at severe disadvantage in close-range firefights. A Japanese soldier with an Arisaka could fire perhaps 15 aimed rounds per minute under ideal conditions. A Marine with an M1 Garand could fire 30 to 40 rounds per minute and maintain that rate for as long as ammunition lasted. In the confined spaces of Iwo Jima's volcanic terrain, where engagements occurred at ranges of 50 yards or less, this difference was decisive. Lieutenant General Kuribayashi understood this disparity. His defensive doctrine emphasized avoiding direct confrontation with American infantry. Japanese soldiers were ordered to fire from concealment, then immediately withdraw deeper into tunnel systems. They were never to expose themselves unnecessarily. They were to husband ammunition and make every shot count. But even with these tactics, the sustained firepower of M1 Garands gradually wore down Japanese positions. The battle for Mount Suribachi, the volcanic cone dominating the southern beaches, exemplified the M1 Garand's impact. The 28th Marines, roughly 3,000 men, spent 4 days fighting up the mountain slopes. Every cave had to be cleared. Every pillbox had to be destroyed. Japanese soldiers fought from positions that gave them every advantage of terrain and concealment. What defeated them was relentless American firepower. Marines would pin down a position with rifle fire, multiple Garands pouring rounds into a cave entrance or pillbox firing slit. Under this suppressing fire, other Marines would maneuver with flamethrowers, satchel charges, or bazookas to destroy the position. The tactic worked because the M1 Garands could maintain suppressing fire for extended periods. A squad of 12 Marines, each with an M1 Garand and 80 rounds, possessed 960 total rounds. Fired at a sustainable rate of 20 rounds per minute per rifle, the squad could maintain 240 rounds per minute for 4 minutes before needing to reload from additional ammunition. This sustained firepower allowed maneuver elements to close with Japanese positions that would have been nearly impossible to approach with bolt-action rifles. On February 23, 1945, 4 days into the battle, Marines raised the American flag atop Mount Suribachi. The iconic photograph by Joe Rosenthal would become the most reproduced image of World War II. But the battle was far from over. The mountain represented 1/6 of the island. The northern plateau, where most of Japanese forces remained dug in, would require another month of brutal fighting. The terrain in northern Iwo Jima was a nightmare of rocky outcroppings, ravines, and volcanic ridges. Japanese engineers had turned natural caves into fortified strongpoints connected by tunnels. Some positions had multiple entrances and exits. Artillery could fire, then be withdrawn on rails deeper into the hill before counter-battery fire arrived. Mortar positions were concealed in depressions with overhead cover, making them nearly impossible to spot. Against this defensive system, Marines advanced yard by yard. Every ridge required coordinated assault by infantry, engineers, tanks, and artillery. The M1 Garand became the weapon that allowed individual Marines to survive and advance. When Japanese soldiers popped up to fire, Marines could immediately return multiple rounds. When Japanese machine guns opened up, Marines could suppress them with rifle fire while calling for heavier weapons. The mathematics of ammunition consumption tell the story. By D-Day +7, 1 week into the battle, ordnance officers reported that M1 Garand ammunition was being expended at 3 times the pre-invasion estimate. Ships offshore worked around the clock to break open ammunition crates and send clips forward. Each Marine was supposed to carry 80 rounds. Most carried double that, stuffing clips into every available pocket. The sound of battle on Iwo Jima was dominated by the crack of M1 Garands. Japanese veterans who survived the battle consistently reported in post-war interviews that American rifle fire was continuous and overwhelming. They couldn't raise their heads without multiple rounds snapping past. They couldn't move between positions without being engaged by riflemen they couldn't see. The psychological effect was profound. Private Sledge wrote in his memoir about the routine of combat on Iwo Jima. We would spot a cave. Someone would throw a grenade or satchel charge. As soon as it exploded, we'd pour rifle fire into the entrance. If anything moved, we fired. If nothing moved, we fired anyway. We went through ammunition like water. This profligate use of rifle ammunition was possible only because of the M1 Garand's semi-automatic operation and the Navy's ability to supply millions of rounds. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Japanese response to American firepower superiority evolved through the battle. Initially, Japanese soldiers attempted to engage Marine riflemen in firefights. This proved suicidal. Marines would identify the muzzle flash and immediately put 20 to 30 rounds into that position. Japanese soldiers learned to fire once, then immediately move or retreat deeper into tunnels. But even this tactic had limited effectiveness. General Kuribayashi's battle reports, recovered after the war from Japanese archives, reveal his growing concern about ammunition shortages by the second week of fighting. Japanese soldiers were running low on rifle cartridges. Despite fighting from defended positions with short supply lines through tunnels, American Marines, attacking across open ground, somehow had unlimited ammunition. This disparity demoralized Japanese troops more than casualties. The brutal reality was that Japanese soldiers, brave and determined as they were, couldn't win firefights against Marines with M1 Garands. A Japanese soldier might take careful aim with his Arisaka, fire one shot, work the bolt, acquire the target again, and fire a second shot. By that time, the Marine he was shooting at had fired 8 rounds, reloaded, and was firing again. Multiple Marines targeting the same position created a volume of fire that was simply overwhelming. The volcanic terrain that should have favored defenders actually amplified the M1 Garand's advantages. The rocky ground provided cover but limited fields of fire. Engagement ranges were typically 50 to 100 yards, sometimes as close as 20 yards. At these distances, the accuracy advantage of Japanese Arisaka rifles became irrelevant. What mattered was volume of fire, and the M1 Garand delivered. Marine tactics evolved to exploit the rifle's capabilities. Squads developed a technique called reconnaissance by fire. When approaching suspected Japanese positions, Marines would fire into likely hiding places, cave entrances, rocky outcroppings, depressions in the ground. If Japanese soldiers were present, they would either return fire and reveal their position, or be killed by the probing shots. Either outcome favored the Marines. This tactic was only possible with semi-automatic rifles and abundant ammunition. A force equipped with bolt-action rifles would have been unable to sustain such profligate firing. They would have exhausted their ammunition reserves within days. But the U.S. Navy's logistics system could deliver millions of rounds to Iwo Jima's beaches, and Marines went through those rounds systematically, suppressing every suspected position. By the third week of battle, Japanese ammunition shortages became critical. Kuribayashi's orders emphasized conserving ammunition, firing only when targets were certain. But conservation didn't matter when Marines could fire 50 rounds for every Japanese round. The cumulative effect of this firepower imbalance ground down Japanese resistance position by position, cave by cave, tunnel by tunnel. The human cost appeared in casualty statistics. Marine casualties remained horrific throughout the battle, roughly 1,000 per day during the first week. But Japanese casualties were nearly total. Of 21,000 Japanese soldiers on the island, only 1,063 were captured, most wounded and unconscious. The rest died in their positions. Many were killed by rifle fire, shot multiple times as they attempted to fight back. The effectiveness of the M1 Garand at Iwo Jima can be measured in ways beyond simple casualty counts. Medical officers noted that Japanese wounded typically had multiple gunshot wounds, suggesting they had been hit by sustained fire rather than single shots. American wounded, conversely, often had single wounds from Japanese rifles or artillery fragments, indicating Japanese soldiers rarely had opportunity for follow-up shots. Captain Robert Dunlap, commanding officer of Company C, 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, wrote in his after-action report dated March 18, 1945, "The M1 rifle proved absolutely essential to our success. Japanese positions that would have required tank or artillery support with bolt-action rifles could be suppressed by rifle fire alone, allowing us to maneuver infantry to destroy them. I estimate the M1 increased our effective firepower by a factor of 3 compared to bolt-action rifles." The rifle's reliability under extreme conditions impressed everyone who used it. Despite volcanic ash that infiltrated every crevice, despite salt spray from the ocean, despite being dropped in the black, sand and stepped on during chaotic firefights, the M1 Garands continued functioning. Marines developed maintenance routines that became ritual. Every evening, regardless of exhaustion, they cleaned their rifles. They wiped down the gas cylinder, checked the operating rod, cleaned the bolt face, and oiled the action. Armourers' reports from Iwo Jima documented remarkably low rifle failure rates. Out of approximately 70,000 M1 Garands used during the battle, fewer than 200 experienced mechanical failures serious enough to require depot-level repair. Most problems were simple issues like broken firing pins or extractors, easily replaced with spare parts. The rifle's reputation for reliability, already excellent, was cemented by its performance in the worst conditions imaginable. Japanese soldiers who survived Iwo Jima and were captured on Okinawa or in the final months of the war consistently identified the M1 Garand as the weapon they feared most. Not American artillery, which killed far more Japanese soldiers, not American tanks or flamethrowers, which were undeniably terrifying, but the M1 Garand, because it was everywhere, in the hands of every Marine, firing continuously. Warrant Officer Kiyoshi Endo, captured on Okinawa in June 1945, was interviewed by American intelligence officers. His testimony, preserved in captured personnel interrogation reports, revealed the psychological impact. At Iwo Jima, before I was evacuated, wounded, we could never show ourselves. American riflemen would fire 5, 6, 7 shots very quickly. We would fire once, maybe twice, then must hide. Our officers told us Americans wasted ammunition, but this did not matter. They had so much ammunition, and we had so little. We could not fight this kind of battle. The tactical implications extended beyond individual firefights. American commanders could plan operations, assuming their infantry could deliver sustained suppressing fire without heavy weapon support. Japanese commanders had to assume their infantry would be outgunned in any direct engagement. This fundamental disparity shaped every tactical decision made during the battle. The Northern Plateau campaigns in the battle's final 3 weeks demonstrated the M1 Garand's contribution to American tactical flexibility. As Marines pushed into increasingly difficult terrain, isolated Japanese positions in ravines and caves required small unit actions. Platoons and squads operated semi-independently, clearing positions with minimal support. The firepower of 30 to 40 Marines with M1 Garands proved sufficient to suppress and destroy positions that would have required company-level operations with bolt-action rifles. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson, commanding 2nd Battalion 28th Marines, explained the tactical math in his post-battle report. A rifle squad with 12 M1s can deliver 144 rounds in the first minute of contact, assuming each man fires all 8 rounds and reloads once. This volume of fire equals approximately 48 men with bolt-action rifles firing 3 rounds per minute. The M1 gives us a 4-to-1 manpower advantage in immediate firepower. This mathematical advantage compounded across larger units. A rifle company with 200 M1 Garands could deliver initial firepower equivalent to 800 men with bolt-action rifles. This allowed American commanders to attack with smaller forces, reducing casualties while maintaining overwhelming firepower at the point of contact. Japanese commanders, facing this disparity, couldn't concentrate forces without inviting devastating American fire. The logistics of sustaining this firepower were staggering. Each Marine theoretically carried 80 rounds, but actual loads often reached 160 rounds or more. With 70,000 Marines on the island at peak strength, total rifle ammunition on hand reached 11 million rounds. Supply. Officers established ammunition dumps every few hundred yards, ensuring Marines never ran short. Empty clips were collected, refilled aboard ships, and sent forward again. The Navy's ammunition ships offshore worked 24 hours a day, breaking open crates, loading clips, and transferring ammunition to landing craft. One destroyer escort, USS Lawrence C. Taylor, was converted to an ammunition transport specifically for Iwo Jima operations. Her crew did nothing but handle M1 Garand ammunition for 36 days straight. They loaded an estimated 2 million rounds during the battle. This logistical effort represented American industrial and organizational superiority as much as the rifle itself. Japan couldn't have sustained such ammunition expenditure even if their soldiers carried semi-automatic rifles. The Japanese logistics system, strained by submarine warfare and air attacks, could barely keep their soldiers fed, let alone supply ammunition at American rates. The disparity wasn't just technological, it was systemic. By mid-March 1945, Japanese resistance was collapsing not from lack of courage, but from lack of ammunition. Captured documents revealed orders to conserve rifle cartridges, to fire only at targets within 50 yards, to rely on grenades and close combat whenever possible. These orders reflected desperation. Japanese soldiers reduced to grenades and bayonets against Marines with M1 Garands, and unlimited ammunition could only delay, not prevent, their eventual destruction. The final Japanese defensive line, in the island's northeastern corner, fell on March 16. General Kuribayashi, refusing to conduct a suicidal banzai charge, instead organized a night infiltration attack. Approximately 300 Japanese soldiers attempted to penetrate American lines, reach the airfield, and destroy parked aircraft. They were detected and annihilated by Marine riflemen, the M1 Garands, fired by exhausted Marines who had been fighting for 4 weeks, still functioned perfectly. Kuribayashi himself died in combat on March 26, 1945, exactly 36 days after the battle began. His body was never definitively identified, though Marines found a Japanese officer dead near the command post, killed by multiple rifle rounds. If it was Kuribayashi, he died the way thousands of his soldiers had died, shot by Marines with M1 Garands who fired until the threat stopped moving. The official end of organized resistance was declared on March 26, but fighting continued for weeks. Japanese soldiers hiding in caves would emerge at night to steal supplies or attack isolated Marines. These desperate men, starving and out of ammunition, were hunted down by Marine patrols. The sound of M1 Garand's firing echoed across Iwo Jima for months after the official battle ended. The final accounting of ammunition expended at Iwo Jima revealed the scope of the rifle's use. Ordnance officers documented 5.5 million rounds of .30-06 ammunition fired from M1 Garands. This number didn't include ammunition fired from Browning automatic rifles, which used the same cartridge, or ammunition expended in training before the battle. It was purely M1 Garand rifle ammunition fired in combat over 36 days. 5.5 million rounds divided by 70,000 Marines equals roughly 79 rounds per Marine, but the average is misleading. Many Marines in support roles fired few rounds. Combat infantrymen in rifle companies fired hundreds or thousands of rounds individually. Some Marines went through their entire basic load multiple times in a single day. The sustained intensity of rifle fire at Iwo Jima was unprecedented in Marine Corps history. Japanese post-war analyses of the battle consistently identified American small arms firepower as a critical factor in their defeat. The Japanese Army's official history, compiled between 1946 and 1955, devoted significant attention to the M1 Garand. American infantry possessed firepower superiority at all levels of combat. Individual American soldiers could fire semi-automatic rifles while our soldiers used bolt-action rifles. This difference, multiplied across thousands of soldiers, created overwhelming disparity that no amount of fortification or determination could overcome. The psychological impact on Japanese soldiers who faced M1 Garands extended beyond Iwo Jima. Prisoners captured on Okinawa in April through June 1945 frequently mentioned the American rifle in interrogations. They described it as the rifle that shoots many times, or the rifle that never stops. Japanese soldiers learned to recognize the distinctive sound of M1 Garand's firing and the metallic ping of clips, ejecting. These sounds meant American Marines were close, and that meant overwhelming firepower was about to be directed at their position. The M1 Garand's performance at Iwo Jima validated every decision made in its development and procurement. The rifle had been controversial when adopted in 1936. Critics argued semi-automatic rifles were too complex for average soldiers, too expensive to produce in quantity, too prone to malfunction. Iwo Jima proved every criticism wrong. The rifle was reliable, producible in massive quantities, and effective in the hands of young Marines, many of whom had been civilians just months earlier. General Holland Smith, commanding officer of Fleet Marine Force Pacific, wrote in his post-battle assessment dated April 2, 1945, "The M1 rifle proved itself the finest combat rifle in the world at Iwo Jima. No other weapon contributed more to our victory. Every Marine who carried an M1 had firepower advantage over every Japanese soldier he faced. This advantage, sustained over 5 weeks of continuous combat, was decisive." The legacy of Iwo Jima's rifle fire extended into post-war military development. Every major military in the world studied the battle and drew the same conclusion. Semi-automatic rifles were essential for modern infantry. The Soviet Union accelerated development of the SKS carbine, adopted in 1945. Britain began work on what would become the EM2 rifle. France developed the MAS-49. Every design reflected lessons from Iwo Jima about the importance of sustained rifle fire. The American military's commitment to semi-automatic rifles was reinforced absolutely. When the M14 replaced the M1 Garand in 1957, it retained the semi-automatic operation and actually increased ammunition capacity to 20 rounds. The M16, adopted in 1964, went further with fully automatic capability, but the fundamental principle established by the M1 Garand remained. American infantry would have firepower advantage at the individual soldier level. Veterans of Iwo Jima maintained lifelong affection for their M1 Garands. At Marine Corps reunions decades later, elderly men who had been young Marines on Iwo's black beaches would handle reproduction M1s with reverence. They would demonstrate the loading procedure, describe the sight picture, recall the recoil and the smell of powder. The rifle had saved their lives repeatedly, and they never forgot. Private First Class Jacqueline Lucas, who received the Medal of Honor for throwing himself on 2 Japanese grenades at Iwo Jima and miraculously surviving, kept his M1 Garand for the rest of his life. In interviews 50 years after the battle, he would show the rifle and describe using it to kill 3 Japanese soldiers after recovering from his wounds. "This rifle was my life," he said. "Without it, I wouldn't be here." The statistics compiled after the battle revealed the M1 Garand's effectiveness in quantifiable terms. Marine Corps Historical Division analyzed casualty reports and estimated that approximately 40% of Japanese casualties at Iwo Jima resulted from rifle fire. This percentage, higher than in most Pacific battles, reflected the close-range nature of fighting and the effectiveness of the M1 Garand in confined terrain. Artillery caused about 30% of Japanese casualties. Flamethrowers, grenades, and demolition charges accounted for another 20%. Tank fire, mortars, and other weapons caused the remaining 10%. But rifle fire, delivered by 70,000 Marines with M1 Garands, was the single most lethal component of American firepower. This contradicted pre-war doctrine that emphasized artillery and machine guns as primary killers. The Japanese perspective on the rifle's effectiveness appeared in post-war memoirs and interviews. Baron Nishi, an Olympic equestrian who commanded a tank regiment at Iwo Jima and died in battle, wrote a final letter to his wife that was later recovered. In it, he described American attacks. "Their riflemen fire without ceasing. We cannot show ourselves. When we try to fight back, they fire so many bullets that we must hide or die. This is not the war I trained for." The rifle's technical specifications explained its success. The M1 Garand fired the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, a powerful round developed in 1906. The cartridge propelled a 150-grain bullet at approximately 2,800 feet per second, delivering over 2,500 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. This was sufficient power to penetrate cover and remain lethal at extended ranges. The rifle's semi-automatic operation used a gas system that diverted propellant gases from the barrel to cycle the action. This system was inherently more reliable than recoil-operated systems because it didn't require precision timing. The M1's gas system worked in dirt, sand, mud, and extreme temperatures. At Iwo Jima, where volcanic ash infiltrated everything, this reliability proved essential. The 8-round en-block clip loading system, while limiting capacity compared to detachable box magazines proved adequate for combat needs. Marines could reload an M1 Garand in 2 to 3 seconds with practice. The distinctive ping as the empty clip ejected actually served as an audible indicator to reload, preventing dry firing in combat. Despite theoretical concerns about enemies hearing the ping, no documented instance exists of Japanese soldiers exploiting this sound at Iwo Jima. The rifle's weight, 9.5 pounds loaded, provided stability for accurate shooting while remaining light enough for extended carry. Marines at Iwo Jima, carrying the rifle plus ammunition, grenades, water, and other equipment, typically bore 70 to 80 pounds of gear. The M1's weight distribution made it relatively comfortable to carry for extended periods compared to lighter but poorly balanced weapons. John Garand, the rifle's designer, received recognition after the war for his contribution to Allied victory. Born in Canada in 1888, Garand immigrated to the United States and began working at Springfield Armory in 1919. He spent 17 years developing the rifle that bore his name, overcoming numerous technical challenges to create a weapon that was reliable, accurate, and producible in quantity. Garand received no royalties for his design, as it was developed as a government employee. He was awarded the Medal for Merit by President Harry Truman in 1944, recognizing his contribution to the war effort. General George Patton's famous description of the M1 as the greatest battle implement ever devised reflected widespread recognition that Garand had created something exceptional. The rifle remained in frontline service with American forces through the Korean War, where it again proved superior to communist bloc weapons. Not until 1957, when the M14 was adopted, did the M1 Garand begin transition to reserve units. Even then, many Marines and soldiers retained affection for the M1, considering it more reliable than its replacement. At Iwo Jima specifically, the M1 Garand demonstrated that individual soldier firepower could be decisive in modern warfare. The Japanese defensive system, carefully prepared and extensively fortified, should theoretically have extracted much higher American casualties. That it didn't was partly due to American combined arms tactics, but fundamentally because Marines with M1 Garands could suppress and destroy Japanese positions through rifle fire alone. The 5.5 million rounds fired at Iwo Jima represented more than just ammunition expenditure. Each round was the opportunity to suppress an enemy, to cover a maneuver, to destroy a threat, to save an American life. The cumulative effect of those millions of rounds, delivered by semi-automatic rifles that fired as fast as Marines could pull triggers, overwhelmed Japanese defenders who couldn't match that volume of fire. Japanese soldiers at Iwo Jima learned what German soldiers had learned in Europe. Facing American infantry, armed with M1 Garands, meant facing opponents who could deliver sustained, accurate fire that never stopped. Courage couldn't overcome this disparity. Fortifications couldn't negate it. Tactical skill could mitigate it slightly, but not eliminate it. The technological advantage was simply too great. The human cost of the battle remained staggering despite American firepower superiority. 26,000 American casualties, including nearly 7,000 dead, made Iwo Jima the bloodiest battle in Marine Corps history. But without the M1 Garand's firepower advantage, casualties would have been much higher. The rifle didn't prevent the battle from being horrific, but it prevented it from being even worse. For Japanese soldiers, the M1 Garand came to symbolize American material superiority. They couldn't match American industrial output, they couldn't match American logistics, and they couldn't match American small arms technology. The rifle was physical proof that Japan was losing not just battles, but the fundamental competition of industrial warfare. The Battle of Iwo Jima ended officially on March 26, 1945, but the island's purpose continued. American P-51 Mustangs and B-29 Superfortresses used Iwo's airfields for the remainder of the war. Over 2,400 B-29 seconds made emergency landings on Iwo Jima between March and August 1945. Each landing represented a crew of 11 men saved, The island that cost 26,000 American casualties saved approximately 27,000 American aircrew lives. The Marines who captured Iwo Jima, many of them teenagers carrying M1 Garands they had learned to use just months earlier, made that salvation possible. Their rifles' sustained firepower allowed them to advance against defenses that should have been impenetrable. The 5.5 million rounds they fired represented the largest sustained rifle fire in any battle in history, and it was only possible because John Garand had designed a rifle that worked. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.